I see by the clock on the wall at 7 o'clock, and I promised we'd be out by 8. See, now when I make my promise, I start an hour later. That way I have to look through the hour class that way. If I started at 6, I still went to 8. So we'll get through. I see Shelly's got a, she looks different than usual.
Shelly, you've changed.
She must have got some of that Rodan and Fields that they use to make you look younger. All of the ladies in my neighborhood, they're all selling that. They're talking about how much younger they look. I think some of those photos might have been retouched. Just a thought. All right. I want to cover 2-3 things with you before we start with the case studies tonight. So let me go to screen share. Move that out of the way. Get out of that course overview. Although these say 6 o'clock, we'll just move them to 7. And for housekeeping, I'll go in and change those all to 7. I meant to do it for this week. Let me see if I've got my edit mode on. And I'll just change that now while we're thinking about it. And so if that's okay with everybody, now everybody prefers 7 over 6. I certainly do. I don't have to come in on one wheel that way, screeching in the parking lot. Delete 7. That gives me time. Delete number 7. Backspace. 6, 7. Backspace 7. All right. That little bit of housekeeping is done. Submit. All right, let's look at our weekly schedule. You don't see that one. All right, so today's is Tuesday, June 25th. This is our first Zoom class for the second half of the course, case study 1. With your evidence artifacts, you should be nearing the end of your app cell. Task 5 and final are due sometime later this week, and then get them to task stream shortly thereafter. You should be starting your discussion board activities as well. This weekend, you'll be with Dr. Laws and I. I'll probably show up on Saturday. I'm going to be interested if he actually brings breakfast on Saturday morning. We'll turn it out on Sunday though. Please remember we do devotional at 9 o'clock on Sunday. If you don't want to do devotional, show up at 9:30. We normally go to about 2 o'clock on Sunday. So I don't stop for lunch. I bring enough breakfast for us and stuff. We just graze kind of through. We go from 9 devotional, 9:30 we start class. We go till, we have to take a bathroom break, and then we go to 2 and we knock off at 2. And then we have our case study 2 and 3 the next following 2 weeks on July 2nd and 9th. We take the week off. After that, then we end up with our last case study on July 23rd, and that final weekend, again, we'll meet at 8 o'clock at 9 o'clock on Saturday and get started. We'll have our breakfast, and then we meet 9 o'clock on Sunday. We normally try to go to about 4 o'clock on Saturday. Sometimes I let you out a little earlier, but we always quit at 2 o'clock on Sundays. The materials that we cover are in the materials folder on our Blackboard shell. I at times have them kind of separated out. It just says go to the main folder because I don't really know about the pacing until we won't really know what our pacing on our materials folder is going to be until this coming Saturday when y'all do Maxwell. If y'all get through with Maxwell and we don't have to go into Sunday on Maxwell, then we can get out earlier each day. From there on, if we go into Sunday on Maxwell, then that kind of puts me back. So we're going to cover these 2 folders when we get together face to face. And y'all got to talk a lot more than y'all talk now. You got to interrupt me and talk more. All right. One last thing before we get started tonight. All right. This is disciplinary data handbook. It's in your materials folder. This is the Bible for all things disciplinary data, all things discipline, all reporting, bullying, so everything you need to know. Page 5. Everything you need to know is in this book. Everything you need to know. This should be, you should have this thing at all times. It has everything you need to know about discipline, about power school, punishment, how to categorize interest, all the laws in here, all the infractions, everything about cyberbullying is in here, bullying. It also has, for the purpose of tonight on page 5, it has zero tolerance policies. I think maybe we just read that. The zero tolerance in the case tonight was not about zero tolerance on cheating. That's not what zero tolerance policies are. Let's learn a little bit about that to start with. In 2014, the Department of Public Instruction took over responsibility for the Office of Civil Rights, henceforth known as OCR, reporting that was previously done directly by the LEAs. The reason why the State Department had to take it over is LEAs weren't doing it. They weren't reporting what they were doing. If they were doing illegal zero tolerance, they weren't telling it. If they were doing illegal seclusion and restraints, they weren't telling it. And so what happened is DPI took it over, and so it becomes a punishable by losing your job offense not to report it now.
Okay.
Because it's a state requirement. You could kind of overlook the OCR deal, but not since 2014. Now, I retired just prior to this, and I used to be the person in Charlotte-Mecklenburg that was responsible for these reports, and I can actually show you one with my name and the superintendent's name on it, and I had a devil of a time getting people to tell the truth. And we had to let people go because they wouldn't tell the truth. But now it's made it much easier. And so what you have to report is report incidents of law enforcement. You have to tell them about all those school-related arrests. You have to tell them if there's any zero tolerance expulsions, which by the way are against the law because they, by definition, do not allow due process. Even if there's an alternative placement, say like summer school, rather than being held back a year, they're still illegal because they do not factor in due process rights. Can't have zero tolerance. Zero tolerance expulsions have to be reported to the Office of Civil Rights as a violation. All right, so, and it tells you right here, zero refers to an action taken by, okay, let's start at the beginning. A requirement of the CDR, of Office of Civil Rights report is for LEAs to report the number of students that were subjected to no tolerance expulsions in accordance with unique federal definition of expulsions and no tolerance policy. The definitions for that are as follows. Expulsion under zero tolerance policy refers to an action taken by the local education agency of removing a child from his or her regular school for the remainder of the year or longer for the next year because of zero tolerance policies. A zero tolerance policy is a policy that results in mandatory expulsion of any student who commits one or four specific offenses, guns or other weapons, violence, or similar factors. A policy is considered zero tolerance even if there are some exceptions to the mandatory aspect of the expulsion, such as allowing a modify on a case-by-case basis or an alternative placement. It's still a zero tolerance even if you let them go to summer school. Doesn't matter. You removed them for a year. The federal definition of expulsion is the removal of a child from his or her regular school for the remainder of the year or longer, which means the next year. Removals include both suspension assignments, so even if you assign them to summer school or an alternative program, it's still, by federal definition, it's still an expulsion. Note it's not the same as the state definition. And so you have to report these because it's a violation of the law. So just tell a kid, you're out of school next year. You can't move on to your next grade. Oh, we will let you go to an alternative placement in summer school. That does not lessen the severity of what you've done. It's still a zero tolerance. It's still against the law. It's still capricious. It's still way more punishment. School districts, under certain cases, with weapons and serious violent offenses, can exclude a kid, but cheating on a class assignment would not be one of those. I read a response of one of my other classes this week. They're a little further along than y'all, obviously. And they were talking about their principal said, when they had to interview the principal about discipline, their principal said that they've been directed this year to understand and be reminded, and that you should not use discipline as an academic, or you should not harm a student's academics with discipline. That they're getting a lot of pushback from advocacy groups and child protection groups and guardian ad litems. The courts are really pushing back on any discipline that harms a child academically, because of the relatively new, every child gets a free public education. That's been reaffirmed. We're going to get to that one in one of our case studies where the regular ed parents are now complaining rather than the special ed, because of that, the law that allows their child that reaffirms their right to a basic education. That under that, a lot of parents are complaining that schools are harming their kids academically with their discipline. This would be a case of that. This is the case tonight. So that's the context of our case study tonight. As I've told you, the case studies that we do, there is a right and wrong answer. I won't do a raspberry or hoot you down or any of that, but it's all a learning process. The reason why we do this case study first is to get you to begin to transition away from thinking as a classroom-based person to an administrator-based person. I know that a lot of people who come out of the classroom, as we always did, one of the things that we vow is we won't forget where we came from, and we won't be like all the administrators that we work for. We'll support teachers 1,000% every chance we get. This is one of those cases when your mama told you, if your friend jumped off the cliff, would you jump off too? This is one of those cases. Because the teacher jumped off the cliff, you should not jump off behind her. Two wrongs don't make a right. That whatever you want to call that, but this would not be the appropriate time to be the champion of the teacher. Your job as an administrator is look out for kids. You can't be a satisfier for teachers. You can be a dissatisfier, but you can't be a satisfier. They have to get their satisfaction from the job itself. That's working with kids. They can't look to you to do that for them, and you can't be that for them. So that's the context of tonight's case study. You've done well. We've covered all the housekeeping things that we need to cover. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to move that out of the way. I'm going to stop my share. All right, who's going to share their presentation with us tonight? I'll make you the host. Don't everybody hold your hand up at once.
I emailed you a link, but I don't know how to share it.
Oh, you want? Okay. Let me see. I had that. Let me see. Speaker view. All that view. Okay. Exit full view. Okay. All right. All right. All right. Stop.
I shared our link with you as well, Dr. Loom.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
Oh, why is it not? Sorry. Oh, probably because Angela, you might have to give them access. I may not have the right to give access.
All right. So Laura, Karen, April, Jennifer, you're up.
How do we do this with 4 of us? How do we decide who to?
Well, it looks like Laura starts first, then Karen, then April, then Jennifer.
Okay.
Will cheating strike Bobby out? Slide number 2.
Okay, so first we had the overview of what happened, and Bobby copied his brother's assignment. His brother was older than him and had done the assignment already. And Bobby admitted that he did copy his brother's. And he said he needed to because he was so doggone busy with baseball. And the teacher gave Bobby I assume a 0. I think it said a 0 for the assignment, but the assignment counted more than half of his final grade, which meant that Bobby failed and he would have to go to summer school. And the policy was said that cheating of any kind may require a failing grade by the teacher. The teacher brought a union rep with her to meet with the principal because she felt strongly that Bobby should receive that failing grade. Bobby's uncle is president of the Chamber of Commerce that helps to fund the baseball team and is on the school board. And the superintendent told the principal, be careful.
So you may want to skip to slide 5. Let's look at, is that where we kind of know, is it 6? Go to 6 for a second. So in some of that, once we initially read it, we kind of had some soapbox issues of things that we kind of went on about. So I think we should hit those first and then bounce back to the discipline. But part of that is participation in athletics is a privilege. You know, someone using an excuse of I play baseball, or, you know, the statement that they're the best player or who they're related to is irrelevant. They're a student athlete, so I think we should initially focus on that part of what's going on. So I felt like the political piece of this needed to be completely cut out. The second part of that, we did acknowledge that participation in sports is a privilege, but it's also a learning experience. So it shouldn't affect all of that. We should help him balance this a little better. So there should be more intervention in that capacity to help with interventions, to help him kind of manage his time. And then the last part of it that we initially looked at is that the handbook states cheating of any kind may require a failing grade by the teacher. The word may is important versus shall. So that was 3 of the things that I think we needed to say right after you look at the initial case study. So then you can go back up to slide 2 or 3, I guess it would be.
Yeah.
Do you want me to keep going, Jennifer, or you want to go?
I don't mind going ahead. The takeaways with the school discipline, kind of to go on with what Karen said, with the severe tolerance, the 0 policy, that severe penalties are automatically imposed for certain prohibited behaviors. I will say everything that I happened to, this is an aside, what I saw in the chapter didn't include cheating. It included things like weapons and drinking and smoking.
Handgun. Just a little bit less. Oh, that's great.
Do what?
I said cheating is just slightly less than discharging a handgun or seriously injuring somebody. The only way that you can exclude a kid in North Carolina is to discharge a handgun. Bringing one, you can't exclude a kid for bringing one. They have to discharge a handgun or seriously hurt somebody to the point of permanent injury before you can exclude somebody. So cheating is slightly less than that.
Slightly.
To be able to exclude one, just slightly less. And you got to focus on, when it says the teacher may assign a failing grade, you can only assign a failing grade for the class assignment. You can't assign a failing grade for the year.
But that assignment counted really for too much.
Well, but now that's the next problem. Now, I'm going to go over it from the legal standpoint, and then Dr. Laws is going to come in and talk to you about the micropolitical. From the legal standpoint, your first problem is capricious. The punishment does not fit the crime.
Right.
You cannot count a class assignment as more than half of a yearly grade. It counts less than 1 point on a 100-point scale. A state exam can only count 30%. The teacher manipulated the district policy. The district
Is that a law?
can't count more than 10% for the year. That's across the board.
Is it a law or a policy?
That's state policy. That's the state grading that's been adopted by the State Board of Education and been
Yeah, I'm looking
approved
for that
by a
law
local board.
policy.
Pardon?
I said that I was looking to see if it was a law, if it was a federal law, and all I could find was the state policy on it.
No, it's a state policy. That's what I'm talking about. It's a state policy. You start with federal. Great job. You start with federal, then you go to state. The state policy is exams count 30%. And then it goes on down. But class assignments only count 10% for the year. And so how can one of many class assignments be more than half the final grade? The teacher has manipulated. So I said, if she jumps off a cliff, don't be dumb enough to jump off with her. But even if we said, all right, we'll swallow that elephant. The next part comes in, the kid cheated. You're going to put him out for a whole year. That's an exclusion. You say, well, we're just going to fail him. Well, he's in the 8th grade or the 9th grade. He's in the 9th grade. He can't go to the 10th grade until he can't go to the 10th grade until year after next. We're going to make him repeat the whole year, which is an exclusion. He can't continue his educational progress from a year. Now, we are going to offer him an alternative placement of summer school, but what does federal law say about no tolerance? It's illegal. Even if you give him an alternative placement, it's still illegal. Can't do it. But let's go to the reasonable person standard. Who among us would say that an equitable punishment, we're talking about capricious, where the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Who among us would think that cheating on a class assignment, you ought to fail for the whole year? That we would do something that harmful to your academic progress for the whole year, even if you didn't know the first thing about the law. Where's your ethic of care and justice? You ought to know that there's no way that there's no court in the land that wouldn't find that capricious. We only put kids out for a year, and we don't harm them academically. We let them come back into alternative schools that discharge firearms and hurt people to the point of permanent injury. We let them come back.
And can I add something that I noticed also in chapter 6 when it said, I underlined it, you have to think about the potential long-term negative effects of zero tolerance policies, especially when applied to situations in which juveniles may be acting as juveniles. Doesn't make cheating okay, but that's something stupid that an 8th grader would do.
But the state, on that manual that I showed you, the state considers that to be just unacceptable behavior. The handbook for Charlotte-Mecklenburg, which mirrors the state policy, makes it a tier 1 offense, and the most you can do is 3 days of in-school suspension is the most you can do. That's the most. That's the most that you can do. That's also in our materials folder, by the way. As you can look at that code of conduct, which is pretty much adopted. They all look the same because they come out of the state policy. For every district has a code of conduct. And they all pretty much say the same thing because they all come out of the state statute. There might be minor variations here or there, but the punishments are all pretty much consistent. You can't even suspend a kid out of school for cheating unless they broke into school, stole the state test, and gave it to everybody. It has to disrupt the process. It's the only way you can do more than in-school suspension with a kid for cheating. Everywhere in North and South Carolina, that's the most you can do. Being excluded for a whole year. Now I know I taught school and I was principal for a long time. I know some teachers, the only thing that would have made them happy when they came to the office if I took the kid out back and shot him. That was the only way they'd have been satisfied. And so over some of the most minor things. But this is a case where the teacher has has violated policy, grading policy, has done a capricious act. And this is not about the uncle. This is not about Bobby and baseball. All that stuff was just thrown in to distract you. This is about, does the punishment fit the crime?
Right.
Is it capricious? And do you not can you not see that this is a zero tolerance? Now, it doesn't say zero tolerance, but the standard of law is de facto and de jure. We know de facto is, in fact, that's what happens. He's out for a year. It may not say zero tolerance. If you cheat, you're out for a year. That would be de jure. Nobody's going to write that because it's against federal law to do that. But if you, in fact, put Bobby out for a whole year or put him in an alternative placement for summer, you have zero tolerance, Bobby. That's against the law. You've also committed a capricious act where you've given way more punishment than the state allows for cheating. The maximum that you can give is in-school suspension. And I like the notion I was talking about, that principal, when the student did the interview this week, was talking about, the principal said their district, they're trying to get away from disciplinary actions that harm kids academically because they're afraid of lawsuits over the child's guaranteed rights to a basic education, that parents are starting to, and advocates are getting after them for punishments that they deem harmful to their, or that limits their ability to get an adequate education. So this one is pretty clear. Now I'm going to finish up on the legal side. The teacher cannot assign the final grade. In North Carolina, under state law 115C 288A, who grades and classifies pupils in the state of North and South Carolina? The principal, period. Teachers do not assign final grades. Did you know that? Let me show you that one.
I know my principal has changed some final grades.
Yes.
And we're not allowed to give anything below a 50.
That is correct. Duties and powers of the principal, 115C 288A, to grade and classify pupil. The principal assigns final grade, not the teacher. How in the world did the teacher think that she could fail the kid for the year? That's not in her purview. It's legally not her authority to do that at all.
Okay, question. Is this, I don't know how to tell the difference in federal and state. Is this one?
This is state law. This is North Carolina General Statute. 115C are all the general statutes in North Carolina. We're going to cover that Sunday. This is the first thing we're going to cover. There's 545 statutes that govern public schools in North Carolina, and they're the same in South Carolina. They're all under 115C.
So to your knowledge, is this pretty standard throughout the United States? Or
It is. It absolutely is. This is one of those that's the same everywhere. And I'll tell you why. Education is a state activity. Public education is provided for in the preamble to the Constitution that states may provide public education. It's not federal government's, it's not their job to provide public education. It's the state's responsibility to provide public education. It is not in the Bill of Rights, it's not in the Constitution. It's allowed for in the preamble to the Constitution that states may provide public education. So that makes it a state activity governed by state law. Now, principal grading classifying students, that's why we call them the principal. That is their number 1A primary duty of a school principal. You sign off on everything that has to do with their grades. Your signature's on their diploma when they graduate from high school.
So can I ask my principal to grade some papers?
Pardon?
So can I ask my principal to grade some of my papers?
Absolutely. You can ask him. Just don't tell him I told you to do that. Absolutely.
Dale, this is one of those things that came up to me from time to time as a superintendent when a parent would be concerned about what was happening in a school with passing a class or being promoted to the next grade, and they would come and want me to deal with it, and as a superintendent. And so I've said it to many people. I don't know if I've said it to this particular cohort, but make no mistake, the principal is the most powerful person in a school district, not the superintendent. I could not promote a kid to the 4th grade if I wanted to. Even if I thought that something terrible happened, I don't have that authority as a superintendent of schools. The principal has that authority. And so I know Dale's going to go over this. One of the challenges is I've watched this tonight, and Dale's been guiding you through this, is the summer session. This is the disadvantage you have. The summer session is you're doing a case study before you have Dale.
Right.
And Sunday is going to answer a lot of questions for you, but you have this case study. But there's also an advantage to that, and that is you're going to navigate this case without having heard from Dale. So enjoy that part of it. But I want you to know, those of us, and I don't think power is a bad term. I think it's a good term because I think people who use it properly do good things for people. But if you enjoy making decisions, if you enjoy, quote, power, and the power to make a difference for people, the principal job is the job for you, because you have power, and Dale is showing you that right now. And so when mom or dad would come to me and say, Principal Jones is keeping my child in the 3rd grade, I would like you to do something about it. I mean, I'm happy to listen to them, and I'm happy to talk to Principal Jones about it. But the truth of the matter is, I can't change a thing. Principal Jones makes that decision.
Dr. Laws, Steve, if you would just continue on and talk about the micro-political part of this.
Yeah. Well, Dale and I had a good time talking today, and we both love this case. And the beauty of this case, and he's already alluded to this, and many of you have alluded to this, that this case has a number of different tentacles. And a couple of the tentacles involve who this child's dad is. And so we've got, and you're going to have to remind me, Dale, because it's been a long time since I've read it, but he's the Chamber of Commerce president who supports the school and the athletic program. And he's also involved in the PTA, is that right?
He's the Chamber of Commerce and on the school board. The superintendent said, be careful. The teacher's got a union rep.
Yeah. So
he's going to have to go to summer school, which is going to knock him out of travel baseball for the summer.
So we have all of these things that come into play. And I think we have determined as a group that the teacher has overstepped what he or she can do with this child. That the 0 and then the resulting failing of the course, resulting in summer school and resulting in ineligibility for baseball and other things. We agree that the teacher overstepped what the weight of the course. The rest of the story is what happens next. if you as the principal talk to the teacher and say, I'd like you to think about this, and the teacher says cheating is wrong and this is the punishment that this child deserves, and you overrule that, what's the next step? Somebody tell me.
I would say that your grading policy is wrong. You have it counting too much. Give them a 0, but
right.
one assignment that's part of a lot of assignments.
All right, and what is the effect on the principal? If the principal overrules the teacher here, what's the impact of that decision on the principal?
The teacher gets mad.
That's not necessarily a bad thing, is it?
Not necessarily.
Your job is not to be a satisfier. You're just trying not to be a dissatisfier.
Yeah.
I think the teacher knew she was in the wrong when she rolled up in there with the representative from the union the next day and said that she expected the school administration to uphold the ban on cheating policy.
Right.
Michael,
And you overrule that, what is going to happen?
I mean, you'll make the teacher mad, but you'll also uphold the law, which is the more important part.
Okay.
Well, that teacher's going to talk to her colleagues.
So,
You're going to save yourself from a major headache by overruling it and making that one teacher mad.
what was the headache going to be?
I don't know how it would all transpire. I just know that.
can they sue?
Yeah, the grading policy's wrong. It's capricious. I mean, it would be a whole downward spiral of issues.
All right, so if this teacher, whether we have a union or NCAE or whoever, SCAE, if they say you need to back the teacher, and we know that that's the case, that's what happens, and you as the principal say the teacher overstepped his or her bounds by grading it a 0 and failing the child, and you overrule that as a principal because you have the authority to do that, Dale showed you that. What are the ramifications? Besides the teacher being mad, what else happens?
Would it be where the teacher would talk to other teachers and you would,
Yeah, and what would that teacher say?
that he doesn't back us up, doesn't follow policy?
Why?
As the policy says, the teacher can give a
This
0.
is politics of education.
Mm.
This is the politics of your role as a principal. If, because of who this child is, doesn't matter if you make the decision based on this is capricious. This child is the son of a school board member. This child is the son of the Chamber of Commerce president. You only made this decision because you're kissing up politically.
Yeah.
You didn't make it based on anything else. And you would rather take care of the politics of your job than the people who work for you. Right?
I have a question. I was wondering, there's a whole part about in chapter 6 about individuals and school boards being held liable for civil rights violations. Is this a civil right violation?
It absolutely is.
So, I mean, you have to overrule the teacher.
This is lose your job, lose your house. You can be sued individually.
Yeah.
This falls under you've intentionally harmed this child. You broke the law and you've intentionally harmed this child. You can be sued for negligence, tort liability. That's the 6th of our activities that courts have found that administrators can be held personally liable, and you lose your house over supporting decisions like this that are clearly violations of civil rights, clearly violations of state policy on grading, state policy on who assigns final grade. It's a capricious act, more punishment than the state allows, which is the maximum is in-school suspension. All of those things, you know that, or you're supposed to know that. When you signed your contract, you said, I know this stuff. That's what your signature implies, that I read all the rules and I know them and accept them. I know what my duties and responsibilities are. Nobody can give me permission to break the law. I can't say, well, I only uphold the law when it's popular, but when teachers don't like it, you know, I'll side with them. I'll be the hero. You'll be over in the unemployment line.
Can the principal get in trouble for with the role of the instructional leader for not having, is a principal supposed to check all of the syllabi that all the different teachers give out? So could that come back to bite the principal in the butt for not catching that?
Correct.
Okay, then how do you handle that?
Well, that's my first conversation would be the teacher. I need to see your grading policy. Now, if you notice, I'm old school and I'm an old dog, and I do things out of habit. And so let me do a quick share. Let me move this out of the way. What have I got right here on the front page of our class for this summer?
The grading policy.
That reflects what policy that I'm bound by. The one for Gardner-Webb University. I read the policy. I know what the policy is. And so I have typed out longhand specifically what the grading policy for this class is that reflects the policy of this institution.
Mm-hmm.
I know that as a teacher, I'm responsible for that. I can't make my own up. And they have to be reflective of what's important in the course. And so you can see the case studies and reflections are worth 800. The Maxwell assignments are 200. The 6 weekly assignments are 100 each. And then the 7 OMA assignments for my half, you can see I have reflected percentage-wise what the university says that weekly activities versus major class products are supposed to be worth. The OMAs were 700 points. That's because that's supposedly that's 30%, which is the major project is supposed to be 30%. That's what I've done. I have pointed it out, but I have followed exact grading policy of the university. That's my responsibility as a teacher. Now, if I were a teacher in a public school, I'd have that same responsibility, but it would be my principal's responsibility to check my syllabus and make sure that I was following the grading policy of that district and the state. The school's grading policy must reflect that of the district must reflect that of the state. The teachers, you go in and you check and you make sure. Every time we teach a class at Gardner-Webb, we have to submit our syllabus. And the only thing that they've ever checked that I know of, they always check your grading policy to make sure it reflects the university's policy. The only other thing is the attendance policy for seated classes that you have to attend 85% of the time on seated classes. I mean, that's the way it works. That's the way the law works. You know that school did not have a grading policy, which would be a violation of state law, that said class assignments count more than half the course. The teacher just made that up. That did not follow the district, school, or state policy on grading.
And the rest of the story is that teacher is not going to admit that he or she was wrong. Mm-mm. She's going to say you caved in to the school board member who's also the chair of the Chamber of Commerce. And the sad part of this, and this is what Dale and I were talking about, is you cannot defend yourself. You're just going to have to take your beating. And because you can't go out publicly even in front of faculty, and say, this teacher was breaking the law. This teacher was making a stupid decision. You can't say that. You're simply going to have to bite your tongue and take it. And that is the politics of the job. Dale and I just smiled at each other today while I was sitting in his office, and in many ways it's why we enjoyed the job, because it's the challenge of it. But it is the frustration of it, that you are portrayed as the bad person because you upheld the law, and you upheld, more importantly, what is right. But you're going to take a massive political and PR beating because you can't tell your side of the story. And you got that. That's why, if you want to be a principal, you have to decide if it's worth it. To me, it was. To Dale, it was. And I have a feeling that to a great many of you, it will be. Because that doesn't bother you so much. You do what is right, and that's just the way it is. But this case, to me, is so much bigger than a capricious act on the part of the teacher. It is that people are watching how you will handle it, so they can say, oh, I knew. If this would have been Miss Smith that was had very few resources and very little voice, if it had been her child, the principal would have never overruled it. But
Right.
the cause of who this child is, that's why the principal overruled it. That's what you're going to be accused of. It doesn't matter if it's true or not.
Well, it is true.
That's
If you read
really
it,
important that you treat every.
the principal at first was like, so he gets a 0, big deal. And then and then he was told, oh, but this kid is a star baseball player and his family member is this and that. So I do think the principal is a little bit in the wrong and should have made sure at the beginning of the year that the teachers knew the grading policy.
Well, I think not to defend the principal, you don't know. I think what the principal said, okay, the kid gets a 0 on the assignment.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, the kid, because the policy said you may be given a 0. Well, that's okay. Policy says that you may do that, but the policy doesn't say that. But he didn't understand at that time that a 0, because the teacher had manipulated the grading system, meant that this assignment counted more than half the final course, so that no matter what he'd done the rest of the year, he's going to fail for the year, even if he had 100 average and everything else he'd done all year long. She weighted this one so greatly that he couldn't pass no matter what he'd done the rest of the year on one class assignment. The principal didn't sign on for that. Principal said, okay, you may give him a 0 for this assignment. The principal thinking that it would count less than 1 point on a 100-point scale for the year, because that's what a regularly assignment should count. It can only count 10% of the final grade, and if you've got a number of regular assignments, even if you've only got one a month, there's only 10 of them, so it can't count more than 1 point. For the principal's thinking, well, so he gets a 94 rather than a 95, big deal. He wasn't thinking at that time, because the principal's thinking that this person's following the policy, and that this will only count, a part of 1 point. He didn't know that. Oh, wait a minute, you're counting this 51 or more % of the grade, so that no matter what grade he's got, he fails. Therein lies the problem. The principal's assumption was that everybody was following the standard grading policy, when this teacher obviously wasn't. But this is one of those kinds of things that you'll have people on your faculty who will test you specifically. Obviously, this teacher did this intentionally to test, and brought the union rep to push the principal, knowing that that this could never stand. that this is a complete manipulation of the system. You know, it's just illegal on so many different facets. But as Steve and I talked about earlier today, this is a perfect case to start with. It has so many different facets in this. The one that I want you to get more than anything else is you have to step out of that teacher role and into that administrator role and understand the difference in your job. You're now a child advocate. Your job is to look after children. I know that you're leading adults now, but you have to look at it from the perspective of an administrator. You have to follow the law first, but you also have to make sure that you make decisions that are for the good of kids. And one good thing about being in the principal role and being removed from the day-to-day with kids, it gives you the opportunity to step back and look at things from a different perspective. Sometimes if that kid's been, you know, a pain all year long, it's hard to find the compassion for them. That's why it's good to be distant. You can be somewhat dispassionate. You can look at the kid, you know, the entirety of it, then other than, you know, Billy needs to get his comeuppance. But as I've told you before, kids that deserve love the most sometimes deserve it the least. Billy might have been a pill all year long, but you're above all that. You have to look at the bigger good. You have to step out of that teacher role, and you have to step out of that romantic notion that as an administrator, you're always going to support teachers no matter what, that you're going to be their champion. No, you need to be students' champion. You need to be their champion, not the teacher's champion. Frederick Hertzberg, the father of motivational theory, says principals can't be motivators. Teachers have to find their motivation from the work that they do. That's teaching school. And if that doesn't motivate them, if that doesn't make them happy, then they need to find something else to do. It's not your job to make them happy or to motivate them as an administrator. Because if you do that, you'll make decisions for what's best for teachers, not what's best for kids. They paid you to make decisions in the best interest of children. That's what you've got to do. And like Steve said, you're gonna take a beating on this one. They're gonna talk about you at every social event in the community. Teachers are gonna be whispering. They're gonna be, and you just have to take it. You know, I consider supporting the teacher in this case. The idea that I don't get her in front of the faculty and just dress her down for all the bad things that she did, but you can't do that. You want to. Now, behind closed doors, I might have a different take with her. And
Dr. Lamb, couldn't you have prevented all of this by having a conversation with her initially?
Well, you have these conversations initially at the beginning of the year when you have everybody check their grading policy. During those work days when you go over the handbook and the county grading policies in it, and you make sure that everybody's done all these and that you weight your assignments properly. I mean, grade point average is a big deal in high school. You better believe high school principals go over that stuff with a fine-tooth comb in terms of who's going to be in honor society, who's going to qualify for AP and IB classes, who's going to be salutatorian, who's going to be valedictorian. You better believe that we go over that stuff with a fine-tooth comb during those work days to make sure everybody knows that we're going to follow the standard grading practice, because you're not going to get me in a situation where I've got a bunch of parents over here trying to burn my house down over who got to be valedictorian or who didn't get into which classes because their grade point average wasn't high enough, or blame us because they didn't get this scholarship or in that college over their grade point average. We're going to follow the standardized grading practices of our district, which monitor those of the state. You better believe we're going to do that in high school. But this teacher went rogue, decided, I don't have to follow that. I have discretion. I can set up my own grading system. No.
Okay.
No.
I think if big things happen like this, teachers should know that they need to go to the principal and talk to them ASAP. No major decisions should be made or anything moving forward when something like this happens. And I think as a principal, you have to create that environment and that safety where your door is always open to discuss this, so you do not have teachers making stupid decisions like this.
Yeah. Well, in a case like this, the teacher intentionally didn't want to talk to the principal because the teacher knew that she wasn't following the policy and she had manipulated this situation. She did it intentionally. You know, this wasn't one of those I didn't know any better. This was when she brought her union rep to say, you better support me. She knew immediately that she had manipulated the situation. She intentionally didn't follow the policy and then, you know, tried to threaten the principal into supporting her. Now, again, Billy may have been a bad actor all year long, but that's beside the point. But yes, I had one of these. In my first administrative job, I had one in the middle school. He taught 8th grade, and he did everything he could to do it. This is the kind of thing that he would do on a regular basis. And he knew better, and I'd tell him to quit it, but that's who he was. You're going to have some like this, who it's a battle because kids tease them or make fun of them or whatever. You're going to have people like this who try to get back at kids through their grades, especially in high school, where it really matters about their future. You're going to have people who are vindictive. That's just part of it. I'd love to tell you that every teacher is assaulted to earth and they would never do anything like this, but they will. And they won't involve you up front because they know you'll tell them no. They'll do it after and then try to force you to go along with it. And if you don't, they'll trash talk you to everybody that'll listen. But you just have to take it.
We had an interesting situation at my school because I was reading in chapter 6 where it talked about anyone is open. The board can be sued. The principal can be sued individually. And we had a situation with 2 EC students who plotted to have sexy time in the woods. And when the teacher reported them missing, they plotted this on their cell phones. The assistant principal, we have a lot of kids who go to the woods when they're skipping school. So the assistant principal knew where to look, and he, of course, found them. And they were suspended. And the mom of the girl sued, I think it was civil. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Claiming sexual assault.
Yeah.
And the school, and because we didn't provide the safe environment or
Right.
whatever, but the school board attorney was able.
Supervision.
Yeah. And of course the principal came down on the teacher because they weren't supposed to have their cell phone. She didn't see it according to her. But anyway, the school board attorney was able to prove that the IQ of the female was actually higher than the IQ of the male, so the case was thrown out.
That goes back to state law that I might have shown you that last week. Also in that manual I shown you that has everything, it says that students who are mentally incapacitated cannot consent. If they're self-contained EC, there is no age of consent. It doesn't matter if they're 16 or not. But if they're just LD, then that's probably the technicality that he got everybody off on that one is that her IQ was high enough that she was not mentally incapacitated and that she was able to consent. But yeah, you have to be careful with self-contained DC kids. But now just regular inclusion kids who are just learning disabled, usually their IQ is high enough that they're not considered to be mentally incapacitated. Yeah,
I can't remember if this was the self-contained or the curriculum assistance class, but the attorney basically argued that
she
had more control over the situation than
she wasn't mentally incapacitated. Let me show you that quickly. Let me do a quick share. Go back to that handbook. No, here we go. And what that's talking about is here. Sexual offense under the age of 13. Get it right here. Here we go. Mentally incapacitated. And what that means is if they're self-contained DC, they can't consent at any age. In North and South Carolina, the age of consent is 16, unless they're self-contained DC. But if they're just regular EC, then and their IQ is high enough, then they can consent. That's what the school board attorney argued, that she actively consented, and her IQ was high enough to do that. That's what got them off. But that was a close one. You wouldn't want too many of them. So if the person is mentally disabled, mentally incapacitated, physically helpless, and so they cannot consent. So you got to be really careful and make sure that you provide adequate supervision for your self-contained classes, because they tend to do that kind of thing. Have sexy time, whether it's in the woods or in the bathroom. Or you have to,
I couldn't think of another word. I'm sorry.
well, yeah, that's a good word. That's a good way to carry. You have to. You really have to monitor them tightly, because they tend to do that, and you'll get thrashed because they cannot consent. We had that was the case at North Mech that I probably told you about. The girl was 16, and the school said, well, she's old enough, but she was self-contained. So, some people lost their jobs over that one. So, yeah, that's it. All right, our other presentation, do we need to go through it?
I guess not.
I mean, we've really covered everything that we had in it. We can click through it real quick if you want, but I mean, we didn't have anything new.
No, I mean, I guess we could just talk about our recommendations at the end, because I think we kind of hit all the same things that the
Yeah.
question said.
So slide 5.
Yeah, right there.
Yep.
And I mean, we covered everything you all have already talked about, and then we put in number 4 because we felt like the biggest issue, again, was the grading.
Yes.
And so once everything had been taken care of, because we had addressed the plagiarism and punishment piece, then we said after the issue was resolved, we need to have a conversation with the teacher about their instructional design and weighting the grades in the manner that they did.
Yes. That would be the first conversation I would have. Why are you not following the school, district, and state policy on grading? And obviously this was intentional.
Right.
And, so this is kind of the question for the evening as we wind down. This is the benediction. You can hear Just As I Am playing in the background. The old Baptist benediction. What would you do to the teacher?
I guess it would depend on how she responded to that conversation about the grading and moving forward.
Now, you know that we've covered this, that, we expect standardized grading. We have a policy, and it's the same for everybody. It's adopted by the Board of Education from the State Board of Education down to our school. We covered it during the teacher work days. It's in the teacher handbook. Just like when in the summertime, we're considered adjuncts. And Steve can tell you this. We get contracts for summer classes just like adjuncts do. Guess what's in that packet? Grading policy. Even though we're full-time faculty and we do this for a living, when we get that packet as adjuncts, they never assume anything. What comes in that grading packet? The policy comes with our contract, and it has attendance policy, disability policy. If you have students who are disabled, if you're meeting seated classes, has the attendance policy, it has grading policy. It has all those things. Every time you get a contract from Gardner-Webb, just like it's basically the teacher handbook. You get a copy of it every time you get a contract to teach a class. Now, we don't get one during the regular year because, we have regular classes, but all that information is the same. It's in the faculty handbook for us. So that this was covered with this teacher. This was not an error of omission. This was an error of commission. There's a difference legally when you go to court.
Right. So, I mean, I guess at most I would start an action plan, but I would never, it's not grounds to get rid of the teacher in that moment, in my opinion.
Anybody else want to weigh in before Dr. Laws gives us the final judgment on this one?
I have a question. If I can find it. You said to consider issues of due process, substantive, and procedural.
Right.
Which I get procedural. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
All right. When you due process has two components, substantive and procedural. The substance is what the policies are. What is the substance of your due process policy? Procedure is, did you follow that policy? If the, did you get witness statements? Did you give the kid the opportunity to tell his statement? Did you take extenuating circumstances and previous incidents into account? All that factors into due process. He gets to have his day in court in terms of he gets to tell his side of the story. He gets to present his witnesses. He gets to present any evidence that he has. You have to collect witness statements from the other people. You have to go through all those processes before you render. And then part of that substantive due process is what are the punishment levels? You go to your code of conduct. It says this is a tier 1 offense, all right? Here's my choices that I can do with him. The least is the conference, the most is in-school suspension. Did I follow that? Then procedure is, did I follow these procedures? Did I get witness statements? Did I give him a chance? Did I assign his punishment and not do it capriciously? That's all these capricious, arbitrary, zero tolerance, all those things are part and parcel of substantive due process. That's the umbrella that they fall under. And then procedural is, did you carry out what the stated policy was? And part of due process also is the grading policy, by the way. That is part of due process as well. It must be written down. Everything that we get when we get our contracts, like for the summer, or adjuncts get, or we get them, all that is due process for you as students. That's what that is. That packet is your due process rights. Everything that we must do to assure that your rights have been upheld. All of that is substantive due process. Whether we carry it out or not, just like me putting my grading scale on the front and putting everything in the shell that you're responsible for, that's, did I follow all the policies and do all those things for you? That's the procedural part. We have, and when we signed up for this class, we entered into a due process contract. There are certain things that you have to do, certain things that I have to do, and Steve has to do. That's all part and parcel of due process. If you turn in 2,000 points worth of work, you get your A. If I give you a C, there's a problem because I didn't follow the Gardner-Webb's stated policy on grading. Because that's, it says how many points you have to have for each of those levels based on the weighting of the assignments that are due this summer. I weighted them according to the policy of the university. Maxwell's not, if you didn't do Maxwell, it can't hurt you more than 200 points because it's a class assignment. I mean, you can't lose 1,000 points over Maxwell. Maxwell's important. But this is a licensure program. The APSEL and the APTEL have to count the most. They have to count 30% each because that's the policy. Those are the major projects because this is a licensure program. Those count like 2 exams because that's what they are. In the state of North Carolina, the evidence artifacts are your exam. They would be our state exam. That's why they count 30% each. And everything else in the course counts 40%. Class assignments count 10%, 200 points out of 2,000. It's amazing how that works, isn't it? So when people ask, why does this count this much or that much, I go straight by the policy. And if you do that, you don't have problems. I mean, if somebody challenges your grade or somebody says, well, we simply go to the points. We look and see what you got. And the way that I grade is basically when you turn an assignment in, it's pass fail. Either you get 100 or you get 0. If you did it, because I'm not going to get into splitting hairs over projects. I'll tell you what you can do to make it better or fix it. But where you get into trouble is when you start, assignment's worth 100 points and you give 40. Based on what? They did the assignment. If it meets the criteria, if it meets the grading rubric, then you give them the points and you move on. Again, that's procedural due process. The policy itself is the substantive part. That answer your question, April? Okay. Dr. Laws, take us home.
Well, I think I love this case. Dale loves this case. It's a great starter case. It challenges us. I do think the purpose of this case is something that you already know. When you become a principal, somebody's going to challenge you. And that's just the way it is. It may be a teacher and it may not be a teacher. Your teachers may be your most supportive advocates, and I hope that's the case. And I think both Dale and I will say we've had experiences where they are.
Oh, absolutely.
They're our biggest fans. And so this is not an anti-teacher case, but it is, there's going to be somebody, whether it is a community member, a parent, a local government person, or a faculty member that's setting you up for failure for whatever reason. And your ability to navigate that is a part of the job. And that's what this is. The question of what you do with the teacher, to me, unless the teacher is insubordinate after you deal with it, it's not a fireable offense. You work with the teacher and work through it. In this case, as you know, you've got a book here that is a national book, not a North Carolina book. So that's why the union reps there, most certainly the northern states and several others are union states. But teachers come in with representatives, and part of it is making sure that the representative understands law and policy as well. And then you do what's right, and you don't lose sleep over doing what's right. As long as you did what was right, if somebody's going to dislike you for doing the right thing, then that's their problem. That's not yours. So I liked your answers tonight, and it's a fun case, and this is what you got to look forward to the rest of the time with Dale. He's going to focus more on the law, and so as I told you, so you'll come back to that. I won't be with you for the next couple of Zooms because I'm going to be out of town, but we'll be with you on Saturday. So that's what I'm looking forward to and what I want to close with. And that is, everybody, I'll see you at 9 o'clock Saturday morning. I will bring the biscuits and the water, and we'll have a good time. Dale feeds you better than I do. Dale's a lot bigger than I am, so he's more of an expert on food. But we're going to have a good time talking about Maxwell. It can be a most meaningful day as you talk about the laws of leadership and how they relate to your world. And I think you'll enjoy the day. So we'll begin at 9. Tell your family we will end no later than 3:30, and probably a little bit before. But I'll keep the time. We'll stay on track, and we'll have a good time together on Saturday. And so with that, Dale and everybody, thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Everybody have a good evening. Thank you for joining in, and I enjoyed it. It was great.
See you on Saturday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.